Welcome to Founders Campfire. I'm Tran, the host of this podcast and a senior at Stanford. Over my 4 years here, I've built many ventures, from a nonprofit to a social app. Most of these ventures have failed, but by reflecting on and sharing these failures, I've been able to grow and build deep connections. My hope with Founders Campfire is to bring together a community of current and future founders to reflect, share, and grow. Today on Founders Campfire, we have Jason Chao. I met Jason through a mutual friend this past summer. We bonded over our aspirations to build a company. I pitched my ideas to Jason, and soon we were co-founders. On this episode, I'm interviewing Jason on his journey. In the next episode, we'll talk about our experience building a company together and why it didn't work out. Jason, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm currently a senior at Stanford and also in a co-term for computer and network security, but also currently taking the quarter off to work on something new with a friend. But previously, last fall quarter, 2023, Tran and I, as she mentioned, started working on an idea and applied to YC with it. I guess my interest in entrepreneurship first started sort of in high school. A high school friend, Matthew Katz, now founder of Caldera, introduced me to cryptocurrency, particularly a crypto called at that time Ant Shares, which later rebranded to Neo. No affiliation with the Neo VC firm, but yeah, it was really taken off. Saw a lot of ICO activity at the time. Admittedly, a lot of it pretty fraudulent, but kind of I don't know, somehow got it into my mind like why not give it a shot, and then ultimately launched a ICO, raised around $1 million, and decided to try to turn that into a wireless mesh networking company. So we were trying to make little sensors that use Bluetooth in a sort of mesh network fashion. So like even if two nodes are not in range of each other, one can send it to like a relay node in the middle, and that'll relay it or propagate that signal throughout the network. The idea being that this would be pretty useful in areas with like relatively low connectivity. So for example, like a farmer's field. And then if you connected these up to soil moisture and other nutrient sensors, you could have like a live picture of what's happening on your like agricultural field. Worked on that sort of part-time from high school, like grade 10. I'm from Vancouver, Canada. So we say like, I don't know, grade 10, 11, 12 rather than like junior, senior. But yeah, I worked on that like part-time kind of from grade 10 when I started through grade 12. At the start of my grade 12 or senior year, I decided to drop out and kind of commit to it full-time. It felt like we'd kind of been in development for a year and a half, and now was the time when we're trying to gonna go to market and sort of really make or break the company. And so it just felt like it was like then or never. I did that for the next year, but then ultimately, things didn't really work out. And with an ICO, like you can't really raise a follow-on round, even if you've demonstrated some progress. I'd say one of the downsides of many of that fundraising model. And then ultimately decided to come back to high school, finish high school, and then apply to Stanford. Another reason why I did that, though, and one of the other many reasons why the first venture failed, was that I was a non-technical founder at the time. So I knew that I would want to come to like a technical school like Stanford, get a technical degree, all with an eye towards eventually starting a company someday in the future again.
Awesome. Seems like you got the dropout memo even before Stanford. Well, can you help the listeners understand what an ICO is and why it did not work in terms of fundraising more money?
Yeah, for sure. So for people unfamiliar with crypto, I will describe an ICO perhaps generously as a cross between crowdfunding and an IPO, in that it's like crowdfunding in that it's kind of happening at the beginning before you have a product, and you're kind of really doing it in order to raise the funds in order to build your product. And it's kind of like an IPO in that you are somewhat selling some kind of stake in your project or your company. I think ICOs are also like a pretty dated concept for now. There were, sort of like given what I've described, they sound like unregistered securities, and in many cases were unregistered securities. I think, in my case, I'm thankful not to have been pursued by the SEC for that. I think in part because perhaps, we were kind of just a smaller case, but also I'd like to think, we were pretty responsible for it. I didn't go out and buy a Lambo or something with the money. Like it was actually put into trying to build this company, even though it didn't actually work out.
So you come to Stanford, you build your technical skills, and you built many things over your past few years here, including this past summer, you spent it building an AI-powered real estate transaction management platform. Can you tell us about this and how it got started?
Yeah, it started around March of my junior year. I think I was just really looking ahead to my graduation that's upcoming and realized that, again, I really wanted to get back into entrepreneurship, but I kind of wanted to do a bit of a trial run per se, just, get my feet wet again before diving into something full time. I mean, I was also thinking ideally if I can get, a project rolling in junior summer, then in senior summer I could not just drop out and start a startup all anew, but kind of continue what I was doing the prior summer, if that was working out. A little bit idealistic, but yeah, that was the plan. Pivoted around a couple ideas, but at some point just got really interested in, this is pretty distinct from transaction management on the face of it, but it will circle over there. I got really interested in telecom. So in particular, this kind of field called digital infrastructure, which in particular refers to the physical assets that underlie telecom, these being cell towers, the data centers, fiber optic cables, and was really looking at this industry pretty heavily. Wrote a blog on it on my Substack if anyone's interested in a deep dive. But essentially, the interesting part is that I think most people imagine that cell towers are owned by the cell carriers themselves, like AT&T and Verizon, but actually they're owned by a whole different set of third-party companies, the largest of which is American Tower, followed by Crown Castle, followed by SBA. And these companies are really kind of just real estate companies at the end of it, because rather than leasing out square footage as you would with a house or an office, or even energy plus rack space like you would in a data center, they're just leasing out sort of a vertical, say 2-meter section of every tower that they own to the carriers in order to hang their equipment off of. So I just found this really interesting and wanted to do something. I think my overall overarching career goal I've always said is to hopefully one day I want to do something that makes the internet faster, cheaper, or more reliable. But I also realized at the same time that this industry is dominated by these 4 huge players. Their customers, the carriers themselves, are also basically an oligopoly, and that it'd be very hard to build something with these slow-moving enterprises within the time span of a summer, say 3 months. So decided to kind of pivot into something that I thought was kind of adjacent. We're just looking at the space again is very comparable to real estate. So then thought okay, maybe a sort of more tractable problem for a summer might be something within residential real estate. And my mom was also a former real estate agent, so I thought maybe that would also help as well.
So let's first go back to when you were interested in cell towers. How did you come to realize all of these things about cell towers and the business behind it?
Yeah, that was through a lot of very, generous people being willing to hop on a call mainly. There is also one other thing. There's a service called Tegas. It's sort of the modern day competitor to GLG, Gerson Lehman Group. But what these two services basically do is they connect you, mainly targeting the hedge fund audience, with a professional in the field, let's say a VP of whatever at a large firm that you're looking to invest in. And Tegas is a startup that has come into this space, and they're okay, we'll connect you at cost, but then we'll also transcribe and record the conversation, and we'll make that available on our platform to everyone. So anyways, I'm saying this to say that they offer this for $20,000 a month, but my friend and I just kind of signed up for a intro call, said that we were starting a PE search fund, and then they gave us a 2-week trial. So my very first foray into the space was using that free trial to look at a couple conversations with the executives at these firms. But after that, it was just a lot of cold emailing, and I think people were very receptive. I think I found that I don't know. I think it's a very niche industry, and so I think people are just kind of surprised when an undergraduate has shown such a deep interest.
Yeah. And I think one big takeaway here from Jason's response is that, yes, you can do a lot of research online, but ultimately you have to talk to people because that's like where your source of truth will come from. And yeah, you just have to go out there, email people, and find hacks like Jason did in order to talk to the VPs. Awesome. So then you narrow down on real estate specifically. Can you talk a bit more about that and then how it led to you building what you ultimately did over the summer?
Yeah, so that was also just a lot of cold emailing in terms of like need finding. I eventually got in touch with a firm, Sirhan. You might have seen that the founder of Sirhan, Ryan Sirhan, is on a TV show called like $1 Million Listings. But spoke with their CTO, and then he seemed, I built up this very rough demo. It was honestly like mostly like a fake demo that I kind of stitched together in like iMovie. Hadn't fully built it out. Be lean and move quickly. But it was essentially like if you have two Word documents, a way to like kind of sync changes between them. The idea that like if you had like a legal contract, you might have like a clause in each of them. Like let's say you're like NDA clause, and you have this NDA clause in like 50 of like or like all of your documents. Then if you want to change in one document, it'd be ideal if you could just like do that in one, and then it applies to all of them. So yeah, made a quick demo for that, showed it to the CTO of Sirhan. He said like, this is cool. It's not something that we'd really use, but we think that like you're really smart, and we had these other problems. And so I ended up hopping on like a couple of more calls with them, with their, he was very generous with his time and with his team. Spoke like with their whole like accounting team. And then they told me about this issue with their transaction management software. I looked more into the industry. So transaction management, for context, is essentially like the real estate agent's job that works at a real estate brokerage is to, just kind of be the face of the deal, be that like, human, warm, emotional guy. And then when it comes to actually processing the paperwork, there's a team, there's transaction coordinator, that's their job title at the brokerage, who like kind of actually make sure that the deal logistically moves along. Like, this paper is signed by this date, we're filing this with like the city by this date, the property inspection's being done by this date. And so we just thought that like a lot of this process, is just paperwork, could be automated with better AI-powered software. So that's what I started working on.
Yeah. I love that you started talking to people so early. I used to think that like you have to have a full app and then show it to people. But yeah, the fact that you stitched together a demo and then started talking to people and then realized like it was not what they wanted probably saved you so many months of building an app that people would have not want to use.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I guess that kind of takes us to like the end. So how did it go?
I had most of the platform built out by late summer, so like mid-August. Ultimately just realized that like staying in the space was, not something that I'd want to do like long term, and also I didn't really feel comfortable like selling this software to like Sirhan. I talked to some other like firms in the space, and they didn't like, this is something that I should have done earlier, but they didn't exactly like have the same sort of problems that Sirhan had in this space, so it kind of turned out to kind of be more like a little bit of a consulting project. But yeah, I didn't really feel comfortable like selling this solution that I knew I'd be ditching in a couple months to Sirhan. So I kind of just shut the project down. But yeah, I think my kind of takeaway from it is I think that you kind of really want to chart out your values before you start working on something long term. I think I've had conversations like with my friends, kind of just stack ranking money, fame, like social impact, organizational impact, autonomy, personal interest, intellectual stimulation, whatever, on like a hierarchy. And like I'd always thought that like, for example, like intellectual stimulation was like relatively like low on the list. And I thought that as long as like I felt like I was making like, an economic impact or that I was making money, that I'd be happy. But I think in reality, like I realized through this that intellectual stimulation is probably a little bit higher on the hierarchy, and like being in real estate didn't really scratch that itch. And then I had originally gotten into the space because I was interested in telecom, but now like I was pretty far from that.
And you worked on this project alone, right?
I did. Yeah, that was also a challenge. I did also go into it like knowing that it'd be like a short-term project. But yeah, if I was ever starting anything full-time, I realized also after the summer would definitely want to do that with a co-founder.
Yeah, that makes sense. And your last realization on the fact that like it turned more into a consulting project than it was something that you could build and scale. How would you do things differently next time then?
I think it's easy to talk to a bunch of people at the beginning, and then you find a problem, and then you just start building. And then once you start building, you stop talking to people. And I think it's really important that like while you're building still, you're talking to people and like different people, not just the one that, kind of pointed you to the problem in the first place. I think, just don't build in a void is sort of what I learned there.
And I think you were also talking about being a solo founder. You're focused on building the app, but also you're trying to talk to all of these people at once. How was that experience like?
That was also just like super exhausting as well. And I think kind of just led to, the reluctance to take more calls. But yeah, it's just, if you're a solo founder, I think context switching is just not something you need to do all the time, and that's really draining. Like, when you're scheduling calls, you're typically saying like, oh, like any time works for me, and you're working around their availability. But that ends up to that leads to like, let's say like, you've got a call, and then you've got 30 minutes, and then you've got another call, and then you've got another 30 minutes, and like it's just really draining to like, after a call, code for 30 minutes, and then hop on another call and like start coding again. And so that context switching took a lot out, and is another reason why I think having another founder is really helpful.
Yeah, I agree. So I guess that's a good transition to what you're working on now. Are you able to talk about that a little bit, and also the relationship that you have with your co-founder?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess we'll be speaking a little bit more about what we were working on this past November a little later or a future episode. But
next time.
But right now, I'm working with Siddharth Krishnan, also a senior. We're both taking the current winter quarter off. And we're now working on essentially creating an agent-native interface to browse the web. So people might have seen some like browser-based agents. Adept is building some. Multion, and I know started by Div Garg, also former Stanford student, is building one where essentially you tell the agent in your browser to do some kind of action, where that's like book a flight, come up with ingredients for a spaghetti, and then order those ingredients from Walmart, essentially just like automating what a human would do. But these agents work by parsing in like the HTML of a site, and then, kind of finding a button to click, a search bar to type into, and then executing on that. And we realized that like this approach is just inefficient for a couple of reasons. Like number one, if you're parsing in the entire HTML, yes, you can probably do some filtering, like filter out like styles that aren't relevant. But at the end of the day, you're still parsing in a lot of text that is not necessary to your end goal, and which is both costly and like increases your inference latency. Secondly, it's not as robust. And then finally, one of the biggest concerns with like anyone deploying LLMs, if you talk to them, is just like the risk of hallucination. And if you have a lot of this text in a page that's, if you just think about a page and a bot wanting to click a single button, like the ratio of like relevant to irrelevant information is just very, very low. And of course increases the chance of you clicking on a wrong button as well. But meanwhile, like these sites are essentially created in the first place they're making some kind of like backend API JSON call, or probably JSON, and they're getting some response. And then they're kind of like hydrating that with this JavaScript, adding all of the styling. And so we were just wondering, like, could we like just get that relevant information, like just the JSON? And that's really what we need. And even like when you click a button, that's also just a backend call, except like you're sending the backend some JSON. So now we're building a crawler that essentially just like crawls the web, explores sites like a human might, but in the backend, like logging all of these network calls, and then we're figuring out the structure of these calls, sort of creating a sort of DAG architecture out of them, so we can figure out like what sequence of requests you need to make in order to make a given command that you want. So like let's say you wanted to, add spaghetti ingredients and buy them from Walmart. You would call our API with the domain like walmart.com, and then your command like buy pasta sauce, and then we'd hopefully return you an API sequence, like an array which would be like walmart.com/API/search, and then we tell you what structure you need to send in, and then Walmart.API/ add to cart, which probably has like a product ID, but you would get that from like your previous search, and then like Walmart.com/checkout, which maybe needs like a checkout ID, but you would have that from the previous API as well.
That sounds so cool. I need it. How did you come to this idea?
I think we were just talking with agent developers and realized that, I mean, like all developers, if you talk to anyone, will say like, we prefer interfacing like over APIs, and like APIs are the future. But, not all sites offer APIs. Not all sites want to offer APIs, especially like if you look at like LinkedIn, for example, or like the other social media sites, because they don't want them like scraping/stealing their content. We just realized that there's been incentive to reverse engineer these APIs somewhat. Singular instances, like I remember in my sophomore year, I had a friend working on an app called the OG app. They reverse engineered like Facebook and Instagram's APIs, and then essentially built an app where your feeds were the like combination of the two. And there's also like lots of other instances like that. There's like lots of like LinkedIn scrapers that probably have done the same. But in the age of like agents, there's now this like, I think, pretty novel need potentially to do this like at scale. And that's sort of the problem that we were interested in tackling.
I think a lot of students and listeners, they have a lot of ideas about what they want to do, but often one of the biggest challenges is where are you getting that data from? And is it open or is it closed? Like, what are your thoughts on that as you approach this problem?
So like in terms of technical challenges, definitely like quite a few. Right now, like for example, we're starting with just like sites where your requests and responses are like in a JSON format. If a site uses like GraphQL or they use like protobuf, that's going to be like another challenge. But we'll kind of like cross that bridge when we get there. And majority of sites do use JSON. In terms of whether sites are like okay with it, I think from a technical perspective right now, we're executing all of these requests client side. So like, or at least like all of these agents are like sort of based client side. If you look at like again like Multion, for example, or like Adept, they're like Chrome extensions. And so you're executing these requests from your local computer, and therefore like your requests are like basically like indistinguishable from requests that you'd make like from within a browser. And obviously, we're also imposing like rate limiting, so like we don't want to be the facilitators of you like spamming/DDoSing these end servers as well. I think ultimately, we need to put more thought into this, but I think we need to construct some kind of argument for the content sites where this is like a win-win situation. Yeah. I think like Plaid kind of ran into this issue as well, and also like even Uber in some sense where like the sites or like the city is like not very happy with like what you're doing, and then you have to either construct an argument where like if you're Plaid, you're like, oh, like people using our API are actually interacting like with their banking systems more. They're initiating more transfers, or like in Uber, I think this was pretty debunked, but like we're like saving emissions or something like that. And hopefully we also might provide enough value that eventually one day like our users might advocate for us and talk to these sites and be like, I know this happened again like in Plaid and like Uber's case where they're like, oh, like why doesn't this app work with, or this like accounting app work with Bank of America? Like, come on, Bank of America, or like, come on, SF, like we would love to have Ubers here, something like that.
Yeah.
So that's like our end goal. But yeah, I think just constructing that win-win situation is definitely important.
What do you hope to be some of those main use cases and the people who would be using your app as you launch?
That's something we've also been thinking quite a bit about. Right now, again, we've been kind of like building this in mind with agent developers that's at the forefront. But we're also thinking about how like we can build a robust, hopefully, non-agent dependent business. Obviously, like right now, there's sort of like a semi-consensus view among like builders and like VCs that like agents are going to be like a huge thing in the future. But we think that like this could potentially also have applications just in the general like sort of integrations space. We're wondering like, let's say you are building a booking site like Calendly, and you need to integrate with Google Calendar, Apple Calendar, Microsoft Calendar, whatever other calendar. Like you need to build out each of those integrations individually. We're wondering like whether we could sort of mold a couple unofficial APIs into some like sort of standard structured official API formats. And therefore, like if a new user comes onto your new booking site and they use like this different like calendar.com as their calendar and you don't have an integration for that, wondering whether we could like sort of ad hoc create an integration for you so that you aren't losing out on those kind of users just because you haven't built out that integration yet.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. I'm planning like a Southeast Asia trip and I'm having the hardest time going across travel websites trying to make that happen. Any last word for the listeners? Is there anything that they can help you with?
No, I mean, we are hoping to launch in like a week or two. Our company, I mean, there's nothing really on our landing page right now, but it's Loral Labs, LORAL.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for coming on the show, Jason.
It was wonderful.
If you want to follow Jason on his development journey, I'll link all of his information below in this episode's description. In the next episode, Jason and I sit down for an intimate conversation about our experience applying to YC, getting into YC, and then ultimately deciding not to work together as co-founders. We learned many lessons from this experience, so I hope you'll tune in again for another episode.